Paris. March of 1314. A small Jewish island in the middle of the Seine. A crowd of thousands surrounds a wooden platform. At its center stands a stake wrapped in brushwood, soaked with resin and sulfur. Tied to the stake is an old man. He's 70 years old. His body bears the scars of years of torture. Fingers broken, his back one endless scar. Yet he stands tall. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, faces death with his head held high. The executioner brings a torch. Flames erupt with a roar, the flammable mixture ignites instantly. The heat is so fierce, those in the front rows recoil. The scent of burning flesh blends with smoke. The crowd falls silent, waiting. For screams, for pleas. But the old man stays silent, instead he curses. His voice, sharpened by despair and fury, echoes across the square. Jacques de Molay calls on King Philip IV and Pope Clement V to stand before God's judgment, within a year, both of them. His words strike the crowd like hammer blows. This is no plea, it's a verdict. Spoken by a man who lost everything, his order, his honor, his life, but never his will. Witnesses will remember this moment for the rest of their lives. An old man engulfed in flames, shouting a curse. Some cross themselves, others turn pale. Because in medieval Europe, the words of the dying, especially those who die unjustly, carry weight. People believe that at the moment of death, the soul draws closer to God, and its voice can be heard. Pope Clement V dies a month later, 33 days after the execution. The official cause, intestinal illness. But whispers spread among contemporaries, too quick, too precise. King Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, lasted a bit longer, 8 months. He died that November during a hunting trip, a stroke. He was just 46, young for a king in his prime. Two of Europe's most powerful men. One ordered the arrest of the Templars, the other authorized their destruction. Both were dead within a year, exactly as Jacques de Molay had predicted. Coincidence? Medieval chroniclers didn't think so. They recorded it as a miracle, or proof that God sided with the Templars. The curse was real, and that was only the beginning. Because Jacques de Molay didn't just predict the death of two men, he foresaw the fall of an entire dynasty. The Capetian dynasty that ruled France uninterrupted for 327 years. A direct male line from father to son was rare in medieval Europe. Kings died young, their heirs often fell in battle. The Capetians were the exception. Stability, continuity, power. But everything fell apart after Philip IV died. His eldest son, Louis X, ruled for 2 years before dying under mysterious circumstances. His infant heir lived just 5 days. The next brother, Philip V, ruled 6 years, then died without sons. The third brother, Charles IV, ruled another 6 years, also without heirs. 14 years, 3 kings. Not a single surviving son. A dynasty that once seemed eternal vanished within 1 generation. The direct Capetian line ended in 1328, exactly 14 years after Jacques de Molay's execution. France plunged into a chaotic struggle over the throne, a conflict that would ignite the 100 Years' War. The curse unfolded exactly as foretold. Today, you'll discover the story of an order whose name became synonymous with mystery and power. We'll trace their journey from 9 impoverished knights in dusty Jerusalem to the wealthiest organization in medieval Europe. You'll see how they invented the banking system we still use today, how they fought to the last man, defending the crumbling Crusader fortresses, and how a king, deep in debt to them, orchestrated the harshest purge in Christian history. This is a story of rise and fall, of faith and betrayal, of fortune and blood, the story of the Templars. But here's what haunts us. Who were these men whose curse proved stronger than royal power? What kind of order could amass such wealth and influence that its destruction demanded a conspiracy between king and pope? Why were they burned at the stake, accused of heresy, when just 2 centuries earlier the pope had called them defenders of the faith? How did a handful of knights who vowed poverty become the lenders to kings? Jerusalem, the year 1119. Dust hangs thick in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of camel dung and sweat. The temperature climbs toward 98 degrees Fahrenheit. Narrow streets overflow with pilgrims from Europe. Thousands who have walked nearly 2,000 miles just to touch the holy sites. Many won't make it back. Not from the heat, but from bandits. The roads of the Holy Land are a trap. Christian pilgrims are easy prey. Unarmed, carrying money for the journey home, exhausted. The robbers know every route. They know where caravans camp for the night. Killing a pilgrim isn't a crime to the locals, it's business. 9 French knights decide to change that. 9, not an army, not a crusade, just a handful of men who swear to protect travelers on the road to Jerusalem. They're led by Hugo de Payens, a minor noble from Champagne, already in his 40s. The others are much the same. None of them hold the title of count. None own castles. These are younger sons who missed out on inheritance. Warriors skilled in just one thing: fighting. They call themselves the Poor Knights of Christ. Poor because they take a vow of poverty. They reject personal wealth. They live off donations. Their armor is worn and battered. They share one horse between every 2 men, a symbol that will later appear on their order's seal. 2 riders on a single horse. It's a mark of brotherhood and poverty. But more than that, it shows they mean business. This isn't a political scheme, not a way to get rich. It's a mission. A sincere, almost naive belief that they can make the world a little safer for those who come to pray. 9 men against hundreds of bandits. It's like a handful of volunteers deciding to patrol the entire stretch of Highway MM11 from New York to Boston. On foot, without communication, without backup. Absurd. But they start anyway. They escort caravans, they fight off raiders, they bury those they couldn't save. For the first 10 years, no glory, no recognition, just work. Dirty, bloody, endless work. Baldwin II, King of Jerusalem, gives them a headquarters. Not a palace, not a new building. Ruins. But these ruins are special. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, built on the foundation of what was once Solomon's temple. The very same temple. Destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, the place where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. Where Solomon spoke with God, the holiest site in Judaism. The 3rd most sacred shrine in Islam. The knights weren't just getting a roof over their heads. They claimed an address that sounded like a legend. The Temple of Solomon. Not a metaphor. It was their actual name. Pauperes Commilitones Christi Templique Salomonici. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. In short, the Templars. A name whispered in fear 100 years later. But for now, it was just an address. The building was massive. Most of it lay in ruins. Beneath the floor, a maze of underground tunnels stretched out, left over from the ancient temple. Water cisterns, secret passages, empty halls where footsteps echoed like ghostly voices. The knights made this place their own. They repaired walls, cleared rubble, and inevitably they began to dig, to explore the cellars below. What they found there would haunt historians for the next 900 years. The official story? Nothing. But rumors started immediately. Solomon's treasures. Ancient manuscripts. Artifacts that grant power. The reality is simpler and even more important. They found a symbol. A place that turns them from just a band of mercenaries into guardians of a legacy. A direct link to biblical history. It's like a startup landing an office in the very building where Steve Jobs built the first computer. The address matters. It says, "We are not random. We carry a tradition forward." But symbols alone aren't enough. They need legitimacy. They need protection. Because the idea of warrior monks is radical. For centuries, the church taught, monks pray, knights fight. You can't mix the two. To shed blood, that's a sin, even if it's the blood of the faith's enemies. The Templars needed an ideologist. Someone to tell Europe, these men are not heretics. They are the future. Bernard of Clairvaux became that man. An abbot, a mystic, the most influential theologian of the 12th century. A man whose sermons drew crowds, whose letters were read by kings. Bernard wrote the treatise In Praise of the New Knighthood. This text shook church doctrine to its core. He declared, killing in the name of Christ is not a sin. It is a service. A Templar killing an unbeliever does not commit murder. He commits malicidium, the destruction of evil. This wasn't wordplay, it was a new theology. A justification for holy war. The treatise spread across Europe. Young nobles read it and caught fire. Joining the Knights Templar became a mark of prestige. Donations poured in, lands, money, castles. But most important of all, Bernard opened the door to the Pope. In 1139, Pope Innocent II issued the bull Omni Datum Optimum. 3 Latin words changed everything. The bull gave the Templars something no other Christian organization had: independence, complete, absolute. They no longer answered to local bishops. They didn't pay church tithes. They didn't report to kings, only to the Pope, directly. This was history's first offshore under God's protection, a tax haven wrapped in a white cloak with a red cross. But it wasn't just about money. The bull let them build their own churches, bury their dead on their land, even if the territory was under interdict. Collect donations straight from the faithful, bypassing local clergy. In effect, the Pope created a state within a state, an organization that stood above the feudal system. Kings couldn't touch them. Bishops couldn't control them. Local laws don't apply to them. Imagine a modern corporation that pays no taxes anywhere. It has its own army, its own courts, and it answers only to the Secretary General of the United Nations. That's the kind of power the Templars gained. Bernard of Clairvaux was their chief lobbyist. He sold the Pope on the idea of perfect warriors, monks who fight. Ascetics you can trust with wealth because they took a vow of poverty. In return, he secured privileges that transformed a religious order into a multinational corporation. The deal of the century. The foundation of a future empire. Now they have it all. A sacred mission, a symbolic headquarters, ideological cover, legal immunity, tax exemption, and a direct line to the Pope, bypassing everyone else. 9 impoverished knights transformed over 20 years into an unstoppable force, beyond the reach of ordinary means. But here's the paradox. They took a vow of poverty. They lived like monks. They slept on straw, ate only bread and water, wore simple linen garments beneath their armor, owned nothing personal. Yet a century later, they would become wealthier than kings. They would lend to monarchs, command a fleet, build a banking network that would span all of Europe. How did a military order sworn to reject riches become a financial empire that made crowns tremble? A French baron is setting off for Jerusalem, a pilgrimage that will last 3 years. He needs gold, for the journey, for lodging, and for protection. The chest of coins weighs as much as a grown man. Carrying it across Europe and the Mediterranean is like painting a target on his back. Bandits know when someone travels with money. Caravans get ambushed in mountain passes. Pirates sink ships at sea. And even if he arrives alive, half the gold will vanish at the hands of his own servants. The baron goes to the Parisian house of the Templars. He hands over the gold. In return, they give him a parchment stamped and coded. It's no bigger than his palm. Light? Worthless to any robber. Yet in Jerusalem, inside the Templar fortress, that scrap of paper turns back into gold, the exact same amount, minus a small fee for the service. The baron just used a system the world hadn't seen since the days of the Roman Empire. The Templars invented bank transfers in the 12th century. The mechanism is brilliant in its simplicity. A parchment holds an encrypted code, known only to the sender and the recipient. The document bears the owner's fingerprint. Medieval biometrics, impossible to forge, pointless to steal. Without the fingerprint and the secret word, the paper is dead. The system works because the Templars are everywhere. Paris, London, Venice, Acre, Tripoli. Their network of commanderies spans the Christian world like a web. The gold doesn't move physically, information moves, and the gold rests in vaults guarded by stone walls and armed monks. This isn't just convenience, it's a revolution. Before the Templars, money was a physical object, heavy, vulnerable, tied to a place. The Templars transformed them into an idea, into a ledger entry, into a promise backed by reputation. A merchant from Marseille could invest money in Paris and retrieve it in Constantinople. A king could borrow in London and repay in Rome. For the first time in medieval history, capital became mobile. The commanderies operated like branches of a modern bank. Each had a treasurer managing the accounts, an archive with copies of every document, security, a vault in the basement, but most of all, trust. A Templar could not steal, not because of fear of punishment, but because they swore an oath before God. Their vow of poverty made them perfect guardians of others' wealth. They had nothing to claim as their own, no private property. Everything belonged to the order, and the order belonged to God. Kings and dukes quickly recognized the advantage. Borrowing from a moneylender meant paying 40% interest a year. Borrowing from the Templars? Just 10%. That's a fourfold difference. But the rate wasn't the only factor. A moneylender could go bankrupt. He might flee or die. The Templars were an institution. They outlasted any monarch. Their word carried weight for centuries. Philip II of France took out a loan to fund the Third Crusade. Richard the Lionheart financed his army through the Templar treasury. Kings of Aragon, Castile, and England all were indebted to the order. Over time, the Templars did more than just lend money. They became treasure keepers, guardians of royal wealth. Their Paris temple served as France's de facto central bank. Inside it rested the crown, the royal regalia, the gold reserves. When a king needed funds for war, he didn't raid his own treasury. He turned to the Templars. Because their system is safer, more reliable, more professional. Control over money means absolute power. A monarch who owes the Templars can't touch them. Arresting a creditor would mean default, losing the trust of everyone else, running out of funding. The Templars know this, and they use it. They don't just hold money, they control its flow. They decide who gets a loan and who doesn't. Essentially, they determine which wars happen and which don't. But finance is just one part of their empire. The Templars build a fleet. Their own ships sail between Marseille and Acre. They carry pilgrims, cargo, and troops. Merchant vessels sail under the protection of military galleys. Pirates steer clear. Attacking a Templar ship means declaring war on the Order, and the Order retaliates, methodically. They were ruthless. The security of their ships became legendary. Merchants paid a premium for a spot on a Templar vessel. They knew they would arrive safely. On land, the system was just as tight. A network of roads, inns, and warehouses. Commanderies stood guard along key trade routes. It wasn't by chance. It was strategic. The route from Paris to Jerusalem was marked by Templar fortresses, like pit stops along a highway. Every 100 to 150 miles, travelers found a place to rest, fresh horses, and protection. A caravan under Templar escort moved faster and safer than any other. The Order owned land across Europe. Fields, vineyards, forests, mills. Donations poured in without pause. A noble heading off to the Crusades might bequeath his lands to the Templars, just in case he never returned. Many didn't. The lands stayed behind. By the end of the 13th century, the Templars had become the largest landowners in the Christian world, outranking even kings. Their estates stretched from Scotland all the way to Cyprus, from Portugal to Hungary. The income from these lands flowed into a common treasury. It funded fortresses in the east, maintained armies, built ships. The Order operated like a corporation, diversified and vertically integrated. Finance, logistics, real estate, military power, all managed under one roof. Profit from one sector fueled another. Losses in one region were balanced by gains elsewhere. The system was resilient, self-sufficient, nearly invincible. Monks who had taken vows of poverty held control over wealth that outshone royal treasuries. Warriors sworn to serve God managed the financial currents of Europe. Ascetics sleeping on straw once shaped the fate of kingdoms. It sounds paradoxical, but only at first. Their vow of poverty made them trustworthy. By giving up personal ownership, they gained control over everything. They didn't work for themselves. They worked for the Order. And the Order lasts forever. But who were these people? Warrior monks who built a financial empire? Bankers in armor? Ascetics commanding fleets? What rules bound them together? What code let a handful of men control a continent's wealth while staying true to their vows? And what happened behind their fortress walls when the doors shut and white cloaks laid down their swords? The Knight Templar wakes at 4 a.m. A stone cell, a straw mattress, one rough woolen cloak. The temperature hovers just above freezing. In winter, the commandery feels as cold as a tomb. In summer, it's stifling, like an oven. No pillows, no blankets, no furniture except a wooden chest for armor. This man controls the continent's wealth, guards monarchs' treasures, commands a fleet. Yet he sleeps on straw, like a pauper. 3 vows bind him tighter than chains. Poverty, chastity, obedience. Poverty means nothing personal, no coins in his pocket, no spare shirt, no say in what he eats for dinner. Everything belongs to the Brotherhood. Even the armor. You don't own it. They issue it before battle, take it back afterward. Chastity means an absolute ban on women. Not just marriage, no contact at all. A knight cannot kiss his mother. He cannot embrace his sister. Not even a simple touch like the hand of a servant is allowed. Such contact is a sin that demands penance. Obedience is absolute. The commander's order is law, no debates, no questions, no room for doubt. The seal of the Brotherhood bears the mark of poverty. 2 riders on 1 horse. Not because they lack horses. The Knights Templar had stables larger than many kings. This symbol serves as a reminder you are nothing. Your brother is nothing. Together you serve a purpose far greater than yourselves. The individual dissolves into the community. The ego dies at the threshold. What remains is function. Warrior, monk, instrument of God's will. Restrictions thread through every moment of existence. You cannot laugh too loudly. You cannot speak during meals. You cannot leave the commandery grounds without permission. You can't receive letters from family directly. They have to pass through the commander's hands first, who reads them before anyone else. You don't get to hold the key to your own chest. You can't lock the door to your cell. Sleeping in complete darkness is forbidden. A candle must burn all night so brothers can enter and check that you're following the rules. Privacy is a luxury that simply doesn't exist here. Even your appearance is controlled down to the smallest detail. Beards are mandatory. Long hair is banned. The white cloak with a red cross belongs only to knights who have taken full vows. Squires and sergeants wear black or brown. No jewelry, no rings, no colorful sashes. Uniformity erases individuality. When you look at the ranks of the Templars, you don't see people. You see power, solid, faceless, unstoppable. The psychological toll of this life is staggering. A knight joins the Brotherhood between 20 and 25 years old. He leaves only in death. 50 years without a woman's touch, no embraces, no warmth of human closeness. 50 years without the right to say no. No choice. No chance to change his mind. The order forbids leaving the Brotherhood. Desertion earns excommunication, a medieval sentence worse than death. Family ceases to exist the moment the vows are taken. If his mother dies, the knight does not attend her funeral. When a brother marries, he skips the wedding. If a nephew is born, he will never see his face. All ties are severed, the past erased. Only the Brotherhood remains, only the mission, only the war. These strange everyday rules feel absurd until you grasp their logic. Sleeping with the lights on, to root out hidden weaknesses. Banning personal letters, to keep family ties from distracting the mission. 2 knights on horseback, a reminder to stay humble. Every restriction serves a purpose. The goal, to forge the perfect warrior. A man without weakness, without attachments, without fear. This system works because it's voluntary. No one forces the knights. They come on their own. Swear their vows alone. Stay on their own. This isn't a prison, it's a choice. A conscious one. One you can't undo. These men give up everything that makes life feel alive for the sake of an idea. To protect pilgrims, guard sacred places, fight the unbelievers. That idea grows stronger than the instinct to survive. Stronger than the craving for comfort. Stronger than the fear of death. The Templar Code of Conduct was the toughest in medieval history. Rule number 1. Never retreat. Not ever. Under no circumstances. No matter if the enemy outnumbers them 3-1. No matter if the commander falls. No matter if the banner drops. Retreating without orders brings shame worse than death. A knight who flees the battlefield is cast out of the Brotherhood, forever, with no right to return. This rule made the Templar Knights the most effective fighting force of the Crusades. Their foes knew they would never run. They would never surrender. They wouldn't ask for passwords. They would stand their ground until the very end. The psychological impact was immense. An army that cannot retreat fights differently, more desperately, more fiercely, with no thought of escape, because there is none. In battle, a Templar knight was a machine, wearing chainmail weighing 20 to 25 pounds, a helmet over a padded coif, a white surcoat marked with a red cross, so the enemy could see from afar exactly who they faced. Sword, spear, mace, dagger. The full armor weighs close to 90 pounds, yet the knight moves swiftly. Years of training turn the armor into a second skin. Standard bearers carry black and white banners. The Boshin, the battle flag of the Brotherhood. As the flag flutters, the knights hold their formation. If the banner falls, retreat to the nearest Christian standard is permitted, but only if it falls. While it stays aloft, stand your ground to the death. Commanders know this, enemies know this. The standard bearer is always the prime target in any battle. Kill him and the formation falters, but killing a Templar standard bearer is nearly impossible. He's surrounded by the finest fighters. They protect him with their lives. Discipline in battle is absolute. No rogue attacks, no heroic charges, no chasing glory. The knight advances in formation. He strikes only on command. They fall back on command. Individual bravery means nothing here. Only collective strength counts. A wall of shields, a forest of spears. One living organism that breathes, moves, and strikes as a single force. Enemies fear the Templars more than any other Crusaders. Not because they're physically stronger, because they don't break. Ordinary armies flee when they lose 20 to 30% of their men. The Templars stand firm until the last warrior falls. This isn't fanaticism, it's strategy. Their code is designed to eliminate panic. No choice, no fear, no way back, no doubt. Only one option remains: win or die. This system's effectiveness was proven over decades of war. At the Battle of Montgassard in 1177, 500 knights faced 26,000 of Saladin's warriors. The Templars struck at the center. They break through the lines, they turn the army to flight. The Siege of Acre, 1191. The garrison holds out for 2 years. No reinforcements, no hope of rescue. They surrender only when the food runs out. The Battle of Arsuf, 1191. The Templars cover the Crusader army's retreat. They lose half their numbers, but they hold the line. Knights without fear, knights without women, knights without past or future. Only the present, only the mission, only the war. They built a financial empire, managing wealth they had no right to touch. They forged an unbeatable army, giving up everything that makes a man human. Asceticism became strength. Limits turned into advantage. Renunciation became domination. But what happens when the system faces a defeat it cannot retreat from and cannot win? Acre, the year 1291, the last Christian city on the coast of the Holy Land. Its walls rise 12 meters high, thick enough to fit 3 people standing on each other's shoulders. Behind them, 40,000 residents hold fast. Before them stands the army of Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil. 180,000 warriors. The odds, 1 to 4. The Mamluks brought siege engines the size of 3-story buildings. Each bore a name. Avenger. Victorious. Fury. Wooden towers on wheels, covered in wet hides to keep them from catching fire. Catapults hurl stones weighing 600 pounds, like a full-grown horse flying through the air. The impact of such a projectile tears right through a house roof. The thunderous assault does not pause, day or night. The walls shake. Dust hangs thick in the air. The scent of burning wood mixes with the salty sea breeze. 15,000 defenders stand firm. 700 of them are Knights Templar. They hold the most dangerous section, the northern wall, where the main attack is headed. The garrison knows one thing clearly. No help is coming. Europe has forgotten the Holy Land. The last Crusaders left home 10 years ago. Acre stands alone. The siege drags on for 43 days. May 18th. The Mamluks break through the northern wall, a breach 5 meters wide, just enough for troops to march through in formation. A wave of attackers floods inside. The Templars meet them in the narrow passage. Leading them is Grandmaster Guillaume de Beaujeu. He's 58 years old. 30 of those years he spent in the east. He fought at Arsuf, commanded the defense of Tripoli, and witnessed Christian kingdoms fall one after another. Acre is the last. He stands on the front line, sword in his right hand, shield in his left. A white cloak with a red cross, an easy target for archers. An arrow strikes beneath his arm, where the chainmail leaves a gap. The tip sinks deep. The master staggers but stays on his feet. His brothers rush to carry him off the battlefield. He pushes them away. His voice is hoarse from dust and shouting. "I'm not running, I'm dying." He keeps fighting, 10 more minutes, until blood loss steals his consciousness. They drag him to the rear. He dies an hour later. His last words, "Hold the line." The death of a commander breaks armies, but not this one. The Templars keep standing, because their code leaves no choice, because there's nowhere to retreat. Behind them lies a harbor packed tight with boats carrying women and children. The port has turned into chaos. 30,000 people crowd for space on ships meant to hold only 5,000. Panic floods the docks. People plunge into the water, weighed down by heavy clothes. Boats brim with passengers, just inches above the waves. One big swell and they'll sink. Venetian and Genoese captains charge gold for a spot. Those who can't pay, they stay behind. The Templars organize an evacuation. They carve a corridor from the city's heart to the harbor, a living shield of men in white cloaks. The Mamluks launch wave after wave of attacks. Each assault costs lives, but the corridor holds. Women clutch infants. Elders lean on helping arms. The wounded lie on stretchers. They move through the ranks of Templars who fall, sacrificing themselves to buy precious minutes. By evening on May 18th, most civilians are safe. The price, 400 fallen defenders, more than half the Templar garrison. 300 survivors retreat to their last stronghold, the Temple Tower. A massive structure right on the water's edge, walls 4 meters thick. Inside, enough food to last a week. A well with fresh water, an arsenal. They lock themselves in. The decision is clear: they will die here. The tower holds out for 10 days. The Mamluks storm it twice daily. They lean ladders against the walls, climbing upward. Defenders hurl stones, pour boiling oil, fire crossbows. Bodies pile up at the tower's base. The stench of decay becomes unbearable. It's May, with temperatures soaring near 100 degrees. Inside, the air turns stale. There's no room to lay the wounded. Water lasts, but food runs out on the 6th day. On May 28th, the Sultan offers to negotiate. He promises life in exchange for surrender. The garrison commander, Marshal Pierre de Chevry, agrees to meet. A group of knights steps out. The Mamluks seize them. They tie them up. The promise is broken. Those left inside the tower realize there will be no mercy. They keep fighting. Another day, another night. On the morning of May 29th, the Mamluks start digging beneath the foundation. They shore up the tunnel with wooden beams. Then they set the beams on fire. The tower begins to tilt, at first slowly, then faster. Stones crack with a thunderous roar that echoes across the bay. The defenders feel the ground slip from beneath their feet. Walls lean. The ceiling collapses. The last thing they see is a crack racing across the vault. The tower falls. 4,000 tons of stone crash down. They bury the last Templars, and 2,000 Mamluks storming the walls as it collapses. Enemies and defenders lie side by side beneath the rubble. Acre has fallen. The Christian presence in the Holy Land came to an end. The Order lost its mission. For 172 years, they protected pilgrims. They guarded the roads, held the fortresses, fought against the unbelievers. Now the unbelievers have won. The Holy Land is lost, the pilgrims are gone, the roads are closed, the fortresses lie in ruins. The Templars return to Europe, wealthy, powerful, owning thousands of estates, controlling the finances of kings, but without a purpose. An army with no war to fight. A bank richer than any monarch. A state within a state, with its own laws, its own fleet, its own treasury. Answering to no one but the Pope. The kings of Europe watch them and see a threat, especially one king. Philip IV, called the Fair, ruler of France, the Order's largest debtor, a man who hates those he owes. The Templars came back from the east as heroes, the last defenders of Acre, knights who chose death over flight. But heroism can't protect against betrayal, especially when the traitor wears a crown and thirsts for gold that isn't his. Philip IV, known as the Fair, sat in his palace, tallying up debts. The numbers brought no comfort. The treasury stood empty. Wars with Flanders had drained every coin. Minting counterfeit money was a desperate fix. It led to inflation and sparked riots. People nicknamed him the Counterfeit King. Bankers refused to lend more. Only one creditor remained, the largest of them all, the Knights Templar. The debt, astronomical, equal to France's entire yearly budget. Impossible to repay. But Philip had another plan. Destroy the creditor. Wipe out the debt records and seize their vast riches. The irony, Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, had once saved Philip's life. It was 1306. A riot surged through Paris. An angry mob surrounded the royal palace. Philip fled. He found refuge inside the Templars' Paris house, behind massive stone walls. Armed guards stood watch. The king himself promised safety. The monarch stayed there for 3 days until the guards crushed the uprising. A year later, that same king would start plotting the destruction of his own saviors. But Philip faced a problem. The Templars answered directly to the Pope, bypassing secular authority. Arresting them without the Pope's permission meant declaring war on the Church. He needed an ally on the throne of St. Peter, and Philip found one. In 1305, Pope Benedict XI died. The conclave chose a new pontiff, Bertrand de Got, the Archbishop of Bordeaux, a Frenchman who owed his rise to the King of France. He took the name Clement V and made an unprecedented move. He refused to move to Rome. Instead, he stayed in France, in Avignon, under Philip's control. What follows will go down in history as the Avignon Papacy. For 70 years, the popes will live not in Rome, but on French soil. For 70 years, they will serve as puppets to the French crown. Clement V is the first and the most obedient. Philip got exactly what he wanted, the Pope in his pocket. Now he can make his move. Friday, October 13th, the year 1307, dawn breaks. Across all of France, the same thing is happening. Royal guards storm the Templar commanderies. Paris, Toulouse, Lyon, Marseille, Bordeaux. 60 cities, hundreds of castles and fortresses. The operation unfolds with military precision. Orders sealed tight, to be opened the night before the assault. Garrisons move under cover of darkness. By dawn, they surround their targets. The strike hits simultaneously. The Templars are caught completely off guard. They weren't expecting an attack. Not from their own king, not in peacetime. Most were arrested in their sleep. Some were caught during morning prayers. Resistance was almost non-existent. The order forbade raising arms against Christians. Even when Christians stormed in, chains and accusations in hand, 638 knights were arrested in a single day, the entire leadership of the order in France, including the Grand Master. Jacques de Molay was seized in the Parisian temple, the very fortress where, a year earlier, he had sheltered the king from rebels. Guards confiscated documents, seals, financial records. They searched for treasure, but found far less than expected. Much less. The main wealth had vanished. Where it went? Nobody knew. But Philip didn't stop there. If there was no gold, there would be confessions. The charges sounded like the ravings of a madman. Heresy. Apostasy. Worshipping an idol named Baphomet, a horned figure with a beard, said to be kept hidden in secret chapels. Sodomy as a mandatory initiation ritual. Spitting on the cross. Desecrating sacred objects. Eating the ashes of dead brothers. Each accusation sounds more ridiculous than the last. But Philip didn't care about the truth. He wanted confessions, and confessions could be forced. The Inquisition knew exactly how. The rack twisted joints until they cracked. The Spanish boot crushed bones in the feet. Scorching pincers tore out fingernails. Water torture made victims gasp for air without letting them drown. Under that kind of pressure, people confessed to anything. Knights who had fought for their faith for 30 years admitted to spitting on the cross during their initiation. Monks who had taken vows of chastity confirmed ritual kisses on the coccyx and sodomy as part of the ceremony. The warriors who protected the pilgrims were accused of worshipping a bearded idol during secret gatherings. This delirium, born from pain and fear, became an official verdict. It was the first large-scale smear campaign in history. The goal wasn't just to destroy the order, it was to erase its reputation, to turn heroes into monsters, to make sure no one dared defend them, and it worked. European public opinion was shocked. The defenders of the Holy Land were labeled devil worshippers. The church's bankers, heretics. The fearless knights, sodomites. The lies repeated so often, so loudly, they started to sound like the truth. Philip got what he wanted. The order was destroyed, the debts wiped clean, their reputation trampled. But did he get the most important prize? The legendary treasures of the Templars? The gold they had amassed over 200 years? Relics taken from Jerusalem. Documents revealing the financial secrets of half of Europe. The royal treasurers turned over every stone in the confiscated castles. They searched the cellars. They broke into hidden vaults. What they found were mere crumbs, a tiny fraction of what should have been there. The main treasures had vanished, as if they never existed. Where did the gold go, the kind that could ransom a kingdom? Who warned the Templars? How did they manage to smuggle the riches right under the noses of the king's spies? And most of all, where is it all now? The treasury vanished. The Brotherhood's main hoard, built up over 200 years, simply disappeared into thin air. Royal agents scoured every commandery from Paris to Marseille. They tore up chapel floors. They knocked on cellar walls. They found copper cauldrons, sacks of grain, worn-out armor. But they never found what mattered: the documents proving the monarch's debts, relics from Jerusalem, bars of silver and gold coins enough to buy half of Europe. It was all gone. Someone tipped them off. Someone smuggled it out. Someone hid it so well that 7 centuries of searching yielded nothing. Historians still debate. The fleet sailed to Scotland. Caravans moved toward Switzerland. Chests were buried beneath the temple castle. There are dozens of theories, but zero proof. While Philip dug through the earth chasing ghostly treasures, something far more important unfolded at Europe's edge. The Brotherhood hadn't died. It had transformed. Portugal refused to obey the Pope's order to disband. King Denis I looked at Pope Clement V's bull and did what today we'd call a rebrand. The year was 1319. The papal decree established a new organization, the Order of Christ. Same people, same ships, same coastal fortresses. Even the emblem barely changed, a red cross, just a slightly different shape. Officially, it was a new brotherhood created to defend against the Moors. In reality, the Templars under a new banner. The Portuguese crown gained something no one else in Europe had: a professional naval fleet. Navigators who knew the Mediterranean routes better than the Venetian traders. Financiers skilled at organizing expeditions to the farthest corners of the world. And above all, people who lived for risk, who saw the unknown as their calling. For 2 centuries, these warrior monks protected pilgrims along roads where every turn could be their last. Now they faced a new challenge: to open routes no one had ever charted. The year was 1492. 3 caravels set sail from the Spanish port of Palos. Scarlet crosses adorned their sails. These weren't Spanish ships. They were vessels built and outfitted by the Order of Christ. The expedition's commander was Christopher Columbus, a Genoese by birth. But the money, the navigational charts, the seasoned sailors, all came from Portugal. Or more precisely, from an organization that once went by a different name. 5 years later, another fleet rounded the Cape of Good Hope. Vasco da Gama opened a sea route to India. Once again, ships bore red crosses. Once again, funding came from a brotherhood that officially didn't exist, yet secretly controlled Portugal's maritime expansion. The irony: the navigational knowledge the Templars had gathered over centuries sailing between Europe and the Holy Land was now revealing entire continents. Financial systems originally designed to protect pilgrims now fueled colonial empires. The Brotherhood, crushed in Europe as a threat to monarchies, was building a new world across the ocean. A world where European kings would rule lands their grandfathers never even dreamed of. The paradox was brutal. The spirit of the Templars, their boldness, their discipline, their willingness to venture where others feared, opened new geographic worlds for Europe. America, India, roots around Africa. Wealth so vast that the Order's treasury would seem like pocket change in comparison. But within Europe itself, destroying this brotherhood cleared the way for a completely different world. A world without checks and balances. A world where the will of a single ruler became law for millions. Because the last force strong enough to say no to a monarch disappeared. Not through rebellion, not through conspiracy, but because it had its own army, its own money, and answered only to the Pope. When Philip the Fair burned that independence at the stake along with Jacques de Molay, he didn't just destroy the order. He removed the final barrier standing in the way of absolute power. For the next 300 years, Europe would live in a world born from the ashes of the Templar order. Absolute monarchies ruled. Kings whose word was law. Louis XIV declared, "I am the state," and no one dared to challenge him, because there was no longer any institution controlling castles, fleets, or treasuries independent of the throne. No structure to shelter those fleeing royal wrath. No power that forced the monarch to answer. Philip didn't just destroy a brotherhood, he shattered the system of checks and balances that had held sway in medieval Europe. The church, feudal lords, free cities, knightly orders, all of them limited the crown's authority. The Templars were the most powerful among them. Their fall sent a clear message. If they could be destroyed, anyone could. 18th century absolutism rose from the ashes of 1314. The guillotine of the French Revolution was a delayed response to the Pyre of Jacques de Molay. Power without limits always ends the same way, in the blood of those who seized it. Yet legend proved stronger than history. 700 years have passed since the last Grand Master shouted a curse through the flames. The Brotherhood is dead. Castles lie in ruins. Archives burned to ash. But the name lives on. In novels where the Templars guard the Holy Grail. In movies where they battle secret societies. In conspiracy theories claiming their treasures fund global revolutions. Freemasons call themselves heirs to these traditions. Historians write volumes trying to unravel what really happened in the dungeons of the Templar. Tourists line up to see the execution site on the island of Cité. Each one seeks their own truth in this story. Some see heroes betrayed by a greedy king. Others see fanatics who got what was coming to them. And some see keepers of secrets. Secrets that could have changed the world if they ever surfaced. The truth is probably simpler and darker. This is the story of how an idea born to protect the weak turned into a financial empire. How a brotherhood of warriors became a corporation. How a power created for good became a threat to authority. And how that authority, sensing danger, wiped it out with ruthless force, leaving nothing standing. But people, castles, and documents can be destroyed. Memory cannot. You can't burn a legend. Legends live on in stories passed down through generations, in questions that remain unanswered, in mysteries that refuse to be solved. Jacques de Molay wanted his brotherhood to be remembered. 700 years later, we're still talking about them. That means he won.